All right. Aloha, everyone, and welcome to our brown bag lunch for March. We're happy to have you here today. My name is Danielle Bergen, and I am the Community Coordinator at Mental Health America of Hawaii. Today, we have Dr. Deb Goebert, who is going to be presenting with us on Words Matter, Safe Messaging for Suicide Prevention. Dr. Deb Goebert is a professor at the University of Hawaii John H. Burns School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry. She is an inaugural member of the Prevent Suicide Hawaii Task Force and is the current co-chair. She is the co-director of Hawaii's Caring Systems Initiative for Youth Suicide Prevention and also has helped facilitate Hawaii's Youth Leadership Council for Suicide Prevention. Her research and scholarly work center on the social cultural determinants of mental health and well-being by identifying disparities and implementing culturally aligned interventions through collaborative partnerships. She's a passionate public health person who loves to laugh, and that's why we get along so well, because I love to laugh too. Without any further ado, take it over, Dr. Goebert.
Thanks so much, Danielle, and welcome everybody. I'm in a quandary because there's a smaller number of folks here, and I know everybody has valuable information to share on this topic. So I did not do a round of introductions because there were so many people registered for this that maybe we'll be reviewing later. But I do encourage you to speak up and contribute and share as we go along, and just feel free to unmute yourself. I don't mind being interrupted as we go, or also to use the chat. Danielle will be assisting me with monitoring that, and it's just great to have so much interest in this topic. So I am sharing slides. I'm hoping that you can see those. And I'm looking to Danielle because I see her on my little tiny image of a screen. Is it all good to go? Okay, so I'm going to be talking to you today a little bit about words matter. We often say it's important in suicide prevention to talk about suicide. And the way that we want to do that is a way that will encourage people to share, right? I mean, that's really what we're trying to do in that process. And so there are some things that can be less helpful, depending on, what you're trying to do. And so for a long time in this whole realm, in terms of looking at like what is safe messaging and even the language around safe messaging, it really was because they were trying to talk to the media, right? And so there were a lot of recommendations put out, and this is part of the National Action Alliance, so it's part of the National Suicide Prevention Strategy, that there were things that we wanted to consider in terms of the guidelines, in terms of the narrative that we're sharing, and the approaches that we're taking. Again, primarily focusing on the media, but there's so many other ways that we share information, and there's certainly been a ton of attention in terms of the way social media is used to share information lately, and stories picked up in varying different arenas, and our own stories that we share. And some of you I know personally, and we follow each other on Facebook or Instagram, right? And we share the activities that we're taking part in, whether those are awareness activities, some of the work-related activities that we do, or our own personal lives, primarily, right, in terms of that. And so how do we turn those types of venues and other venues that are just general conversations and types of things that we're doing into approaches that can have a positive conversation about suicide? I think that's ultimately our goal, right, is to contribute to that. So the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, and this is one of the things that I will be sending out to folks, has been our basis. Like, what is it that we want to do when we think about safe messaging, and what are we trying to not wanting to do that might be a little bit more hazardous? And so a lot of the things not to do have to, they focus more on that event, so that we're not glorifying or romanticizing suicide in any way, that we're not talking about the event in a way that might make it sound attractive to somebody that's feeling invisible, right? That we're not normalizing it and saying, you know, wow, this is so common, right? And so the words, when we start saying, oh, it's super common, everyone thinks about suicide. And it's like, oh, well, if everybody's thinking about it, then this is good. And I don't need help because I'm thinking about it, right? That's not a message that we want to get out there. They oversimplify the causes, right? They want to draw that direct connection. And we all do that. It's part of our natural processes, right? It's like, let's try to make sense of this. We can't understand something that's occurred. How can we relate it to? And so we look for those precipitating actions. Oh, they just suffered a breakup. Well, you know, people break up all the time. That does not always lead to suicide. We need to have appropriate coping strategies to deal with those things. It's much more complicated. There's lots of things going on in their lives. And then they may define some of the details or the way that somebody died by suicide. And we want to stay away from those types of things. What do we want to do? We want to emphasize that there is help, there is hope, and we want to provide that information. You know, where can you go for that? What are some of the numbers that are available? Are you available, right? Depending on whether it's something personal or versus something national. We want to emphasize that we have a lot of activities going on, and we do. The Maui Task Force is extremely active in suicide prevention, Eolaho. They meet regularly, they're doing trainings all the time, they have community events, they have brown bags that connect to suicide, right, through them or through their partners, and they have lots of partnerships. Those are all really positive things that we can talk about and emphasize. And we want to let people know what the warning signs are, what to look for, as well as that help is there. There are effective treatments for mental illness, and they work, and they might not work right away, but they will work, right? So, you know, what's going to be in place until something starts working. And those are the basic messages. So we tried to turn those around, and this is always a challenge in public health, I think, in general, which is my background in training. When I was going through school, and now I feel like it was a very long time ago, but we focused on a lot of don't messages, right? Just say no was like the heyday of my training. Like, okay, just say no, and that was going to solve everything. And we now know that that doesn't work, and that when we tell people don't do something, right, that it actually can backfire. Like if you're having a whole bunch of don'ts, it's like, oh, well, I'll just test that. And so let's tell people what we do want them to do. So what are some key things that we can tell people to do, safe things that build this? So these are our, and based on the state's strategic plan for suicide, we already defined some of those messages, right? There are hope, there are help, there are strength, there are heal messages, right? Hope, help, and healing. And it's not about sad or shock or trauma, which is, people are drawn to that, but it's creating that positive narrative, right? Moving it to how can we prevent this, that prevention does work, that we have a lot of resilience that we can tap into, and we can actually build resilience, and that recovery is in fact possible. And we can share personal stories about all of these things, and we have effective programs and services available. So those are the types of things that we want to be able to share. And then, you know, what is the purpose of what we're trying to do? Are we trying to raise awareness? Are we trying to engage someone into getting treatment or help, or for healing? So what are some of those messages that we can share? Well, the first is, I'm here to listen, right? I'm here to listen. We know, and Mental Health America of Hawaii, shout out to you all, as always, but they have a great program, Ho'olohi Pono, which is their Youth Suicide and Bullying Prevention Program. This is a key message. Why is it ho'olohepono? Why are we talking about listening? This is an action that every single person can take and help somebody that's struggling with tough times, right? This is the action. So when we share messages, when we put out, let's listen with our heart, mind, body, right? Or I love this kanji, the word listen, and how it ties all these different things in to each other, right? That it's actually literally made up the word for eyes, focus, heart, mind, and ears. But taking that time, I am going to use throughout this some stories about my own self-care activities, which is that I walk the beach every morning, almost every morning, right? And we have those conversations, and people are starting to talk to each other more as we're opening up more. And they say, how are you doing? But they're walking and they're continuing to walk. That is not a listening opportunity, right? These are not, they're not something that you say as you're passing by, hey, how are you doing? That's not really somebody saying, I want to know how you're really doing, right? This is somebody that's trying to communicate that I am here for you, I'm going to make time for you, and I can listen to you. And how do we get that out? We also know that connecting, and of course, listening is one way, but if we connect to someone that's struggling, that they are more likely to seek help. So how can we connect to them? How can we show them that it's okay to reach out for help? And so those are other types of messages. And in that whole area, this is our kind of our help area. We often share all of these different numbers, right? That they're here for you, they're available in that time of crisis when you're having a tough time, whether you're feeling stressed, whether you're struggling with depression or anxiety or anger or all those big emotions, that, you know, there's help. And then our third is that we want to offer hope, right? And oftentimes hope is through healing. These are just some examples of from youth. And when we said, you know, when you think of hope, what is it that you're looking for? And what brings you hope? And it's like being kind to yourself, that somebody's there for you, that you're enough, right? Those are messages. But I think oftentimes we don't give enough credit to forgiveness, right? That is a really hopeful thing, to be able to forgive ourselves and to forgive others. So there's a whole bunch of healing strategies that often fit. So we all, you know, we usually think of hope as being at the beginning, right? Like that's our prevention stuff, and that's our youth, and that's all these early signs. But hope can also come at the end as we work through these struggles, and we try to, and we now see light again. So it's also super important to understand your audience, and who are you trying to speak to when you're messaging. One of the things, as mentioned, I work with youth groups. We get different people attracted to joining a group that's going to focus on suicide prevention, right? We get people that are interested in helping careers, right? So maybe they want to become a nurse or a social worker or a physician, or a psychologist or what have you. And some of those folks have had their own life experience and they've struggled, but some of them have not, and they have a hard time relating to that. Whereas we also have people that come because they've had a close family member or friend that has made an attempt before or has died by suicide. And that brings a very different perspective, right, to the table. And we need all of those perspectives, right, because we're trying to reach everyone at some point. So are we trying to reach family and friends of people at risk? That would be everyone in the community, right? Is that a general reach out? And we want to give them permission to talk about suicide and let them know that there's support. Are we trying to reach the people at risk, right? So not the people connected to someone at risk, but, and again, this is a very broad audience, but if somebody is in fact struggling, we're trying to validate that suffering and the pain that they're going through. We want to know that they're loved, they're cared for, that we're here from them, and that suicide is not the option, right? There's other avenues to try and get through these tough times, and in fact that they've been through tough times before, so they've had some success at getting through tough times. And encourage help seeking. And then for our survivors, for people healing, we need to let them know that grief, it's a messy thing. I actually recently lost someone to Alzheimer's, a very close uncle, like a father. And I didn't realize, and loss is it's just a thing that can attack you. But I was looking for a couple pictures and it just brought up my father's death. And then it started, and then that whole process brought up, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm trapped in a grief cycle right now. And all the deaths were being brought to the surface because it was a very close family member that had died. And so, we think about that. We think, there's these rules that are fairly arbitrary, that it takes a year to mourn. I mean, my father died 20 years ago. My brother died by suicide, 40 years ago. And, it comes up. I don't know when it's going to come up, but it does come up for each person at different places. And so we need to think about that.
Deb, if I can interrupt, we do have a question in the chat.
Yes.
From Tony, and she says, if you possibly have all three, and I'm assuming these categories in your audience, do you touch on all three?
Yeah, so from a messaging standpoint, and we will move towards like, what does it mean to develop slogans and how you want to think about it. Usually you're not mixing your audience in your message. And that's so that you're sure to reach who you're trying to reach. If you try to do everything all at once, it doesn't follow. I don't know if you remember the KISS philosophy, keep it simple with an extra S, that we don't use anymore. So it's just keep it simple. It doesn't follow that philosophy. So your message might get lost. It's best to develop separate messages for each audience. And this is not exclusive to social media, but I actually pulled this off of one of the social media sites that I saw. I just snapped this picture because I was like, oh my gosh, this is something that comes up all the time. And particularly the youth, they're talking about this, this toxic positivity. And I'm hearing more and more like, and you see it where it's like, oh, you can only have good vibes here. Wow, you're shutting people down from whatever emotions they're feeling, right? When you do that, or it'll be better tomorrow, right? Or a more negative way even to say that is you'll just get over it, right? So, don't worry about it. It'll be better tomorrow, right? Like, whoa, okay. That's just not validating where people are at. And if they're not feeling validated, they're not going to turn to you in any way. And I don't think it's intentional all the time. I think people are well-meaning when they say don't give up, right? Like that's a well-meaning thing. I think people feel that, but it doesn't meet people necessarily where they're at, and that's what we're trying to do in this process. So just be aware, and that's part of the reason words matter, right? Is being aware of how that might feel from the person that you're trying to reach, and again, so that's why it depends on what your message is and who you're trying to reach with that. Okay, so I want to go through a couple activities, and these are based on some things that have happened locally at various points in time. And so just want you to share your thoughts, again, through chat, or just feel free to unmute yourself. The first are, what do you think of this idea where a youth group wants to host a T-shirt campaign, and the slogan that they've come up with is "Suicide is selfish." Suicide is selfish. So who do you think this might reach? Do you think that's a valuable slogan? Do you think it might be harmful in any way to use that message?
A lot of stuff in the chat. Harmful, harmful, terrible idea, harmful. It's not the best choice. Harmful, demeaning,
Yeah.
devalidating.
Okay. So, pardon? Okay. Yeah, so absolutely. Overall, I would say that this is not a good idea. As a campaign in general, I would say no. There are some individuals and interesting, so in a group conversation, we've had folks that have struggled with suicide and felt like this is a message that did speak to them. It's been very rare. Most people that have struggled have found this very hurtful. And that they, you know, they felt that the people that came up with the slogan didn't understand what it was like to go through a mental health challenge, that they were not doing it to draw attention to themselves, right? And that's the type of thing that gets up, and that's the type of misunderstanding and associate, you know, all of the stigma things that we hear. It's like they're doing this to bring attention to themselves, because that's, you know, and maybe they are looking for attention, but that's because there's a reason that they need attention, right? And so it's not addressing that at all. So overall, yes, I concur with the overall group dynamic. It's only one time that I've ever talked about this in a group where somebody said, that is the message I heard and it helped me. But we're trying to reach multiple people with a campaign like this, right? When we're wearing t-shirts, we need it to speak to most people that are struggling. And for most people that are struggling, this is a message that says, I'm not going to talk to you. A school-wide assembly about bullying after a student dies by suicide. How is this messaging approach? We're going to send out so information for people to come and listen to a presentation about bullying in a very large group. Anything coming up there, Danielle?
Yeah, one person kind of pointless. I think that can work depending on its delivery, being reactive versus proactive.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of challenge here when you're doing something in a big group, because it doesn't allow anybody to share what they are feeling individually. So that's one of the challenges, has to do with this anything large group right after a death is, you know, you have to be very careful in terms of what you're selecting. And so this would be like a awareness campaign about bullying. The other thing is, in this particular instance where this came up, the person that had died by suicide had actually been bullied. And so it can send a message that they were bullied to death. And we've seen articles in newspapers and on the cover of magazines, and bullicide was even a word that was being thrown around. I'm not sure, I don't support that, by the way, but so it was appearing. And so people make that connection. Well, what happens to the other people, and it's not small numbers, that are bullied at the same school, and they feel like the bullying is not going to end? It can actually convey that message, right? That the only way to make the bullying stop is to take your own life. And that's not a message we want to share. So there are other things that can be done, and bullying can be brought up in a conversation. Even the kids would bring it up themselves, right? As you're talking in groups. But to do anything in assembly, people are going to become even more invisible that are struggling, and that's not what we're trying to do. A community group wants to write an article about suicide. Community group wants to write an article about suicide.
We have one answer, says sure, be factual, keep specifics out. awareness article about suicide prevention, depending on the topics covered specifically, would suffice, could be more informative.
Yeah, absolutely. All of those things. Yes, we want to talk about suicide. We want to share. We want to say May is Mental Health Awareness Month, right? Like, that's a great thing to talk about in an article. Here's some things that are happening. Here's some trainings that are going on in the community. Here's some self-care things that you can do, right? It's not specific to suicide death. So, and if somebody approaches you about an article on, a suicide death, you can turn that around into, let me tell you about what to look for. Here's the numbers that I want you to share, right? So I would never say no to somebody that approaches me from the media to talk about suicide, but I may change, right? Like change the narrative again so that it's a positive type of thing. Okay, so I want to go through a few examples. And most of these are because I work with youth groups, so you'll see examples from youth groups. The first one was actually the very first group that I worked with was in Waimanalo, and they wanted to do a Facebook campaign, and they were doing a whole bunch of community activities, showing up at all the community fairs, at school campus whenever they had different, assemblies and those types of things, and they were set up outside, and they basically asked people to share a message of hope. And the specific question they said is, if you knew someone who was thinking about suicide, what's something you would tell them that could give them hope and help and get them to seek help? And they kept adding to this. So they would have people share these messages in whatever way possible, and then they were displaying them, and so they would have it running nonstop at these events. So people were adding to it, but they were also cycling through and seeing all these messages. What does that do? Well, that lets you see people in your community. And this one says, today is hard, tomorrow may be harder, but one day it will get better. Here's my hands, I'll never let go, right? And so now you start seeing your community members and they're sharing their thoughts with you. And you can see that there's all these people that care, all these people that you can turn to, right? And it was growing and growing. At the conclusion of this campaign, they had 600 and something different messages of hope that were shared. There's an example from Maui. They had brought kids from across the state. And I was joking with Danielle. She's that, oh, look, there it is behind her. I don't know if you can see behind her picture. There's the poster. But they created these different posters as a way to share, again, these messages. And they drew them out on poster board as they met in small groups, and they developed, different things. And then these were recreated as images, and now these are up at the schools as posters. So it shows, so they're that one beside next to each other. So there's a whole bunch of different ones, and they're created by different people. And what's interesting about doing that is you can see that what is captured on there is going to be different, and which one of these posters is going to speak to the person that may be struggling might depend on what their interests are, right? And so it may be very different. So it's good to capture different ideas, different ways of displaying that. And there's the one behind Danielle. So that's a way, what is going to work for each person, very much a different type of thing. So I'm back here at our safe messaging guidelines, right? We want to give those positive narratives, know what the purpose is, and we use that to develop our slogans. So just if you can just shout out or type in a couple of slogans that really speak to you that you remember. Sometimes then, and And it's okay, no judgment on what they are and what they're related to, because you may not even purchase this product, but you might know some slogans because they're so memorable.
Have a Coke and a smile.
Coke and a smile, yep. And they're trying to sell you an emotion, right?
Everything's
Coke
better
and
with,
smile.
yeah, everything's better with Bluebonnet on it.
Right, so a little bit of rhyming, and you saw that in some of the messages that the youth created. Sometimes they used rhymes. Yeah. Well, these are the top campaigns of all time. Nike's Just Do It, Apple Think Different, Wendy's Where's the Beef, Coca-Cola, not the smile, but it does open happiness, and you can see they're still messaging the same thing, right? So what is it about these things that have us remember them, and what can we do? So there's a process to creating those, and first is to define that issue and what it is about that issue and what you want to draw attention to. And so you can think of it. You can think of are you trying to talk about suicide prevention? Do you want to, is suicide the word you want to share, or do you want to talk about strengths? Are you trying to talking about caring for yourself or coping? Or do you want to talk about healing, right? What is the big area that you're looking for? And then, try to think about statements that might bring attention to this. I think that the slogan and issue creating is really best done in teams, because when it's only one idea, we don't build off of each other. And I think the catchiest ones are done that way. And how can you support those issues? And so this is just a worksheet, but you're trying to really narrow it down to just something catchy. You saw like the slogans themselves were not very long. If they're 2 words, right? Like we're really looking for something short. And then should you use a hashtag? What is the purpose of a hashtag? When you put a hashtag on, regardless of whether your accounts are private, you are making that information public. So you're sharing beyond. So if this is something you're trying to reach other people, using a hashtag does allow it to do that. So you need to know it's going public. Somebody can search those hashtags and find everything. So there's some advantages to it. But what hashtag do you use? You might want to check what, because sometimes it's like, I think we used Inspire Hope, and then we were like, oh, that other people are using Inspire Hope as a hashtag, but it's not sharing the same message. And so is it something, and then we ended up adding 808. So it was something specific to Hawaii. I know, like, for example, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, AFSP, and then Hawaii HI. That's a hashtag, so you can see what's happening specifically with that group. So I decided I was not going to do that, given the interest of time. But the process would be to pick a topic and then go through. And usually when we do brainstorming, some people are very fact-driven, some people are very emotion-driven, and some people are very action-driven. And that's why I think it's good to have different folks work with you when you're trying to create a message and try out different things, because where is it that you want to pull? And so I actually have an example from some teens out on the leeward side of Oahu that pulled this together. And you can kind of see their process. So they wanted to work on mental health as a topic. And they just started brainstorming different ideas of stress, anxiety, being judged, not feeling motivated, all these different things. COVID wrecking our lives, right? Like they're very much looking at that. And so what was the message that they were trying? That they needed to have their own power to set expectations. And then they started sketching out some ideas and coming up with different ways to draw it. And, well, they felt that it needed to be in bright colors and they needed to thinking about it. And so again, this is not a finished product, but power in you was their final message. And they wanted to have this kind of mountain that covered with all these different things, but that you still could rise above it. And that's what they wanted to message. So I'm showing you this just to give you an idea of kind of that process that you go through. It's not instantaneous and boom, we have this great thing as we go through it. And it goes through several iterations as well. So this is a different one. I'm still focusing on mental health. And again, you can see, I'm not sure if you can read all of these, but your voice, feelings, and thoughts are heard here. Life is something to get by slowly. Life is a story, but you have to stay alive in order to tell it. Life is full of roller coasters. And so they're just, I mean, again, in this brainstorming phase, you're not looking to be, you can worry about that language later because this is not being shared specifically. People are thinking through those messages and then they're thinking about, well, what does this mean and how is it going to be heard? And where do we want to go and what are those images? And who did they want to approach? And so they were talking about their community and members in their community and anyone that doesn't feel like they're enough. And then they decided that that was all teenagers at some point. And so again, this is more of a, like, don't expect to get there right away. It's something you want to work through and then you're going to, touch upon it again. We haven't gone back yet to this particular one. And so more and more we hear, what a great way to share. We have so many people on social media. This would be an easy way for us to get involved and for us to do something, right? If you're action oriented, this is something that you can do. So you can share hope and connection. So we are trying to get Sources of Strength, a program that's been evidence-based and shown to reduce suicide and substance use and more importantly, increase resilience across the board for decades now. So long-term impacts. It is on Maui already. It is on Oahu already, but we're trying to expand that out. And it focuses on these strengths. And what do these strengths do? They allow us to share hope. They allow us to focus in on self-care. And so if we were going to tie that in to some messaging that might be done on social media, everybody has images on their cameras, right? I'm pretty sure we take pictures of all kinds of things. As I mentioned earlier, that I walk the beach, and for a while, a lot of my pictures were just pictures of those walks. And for me, that was a way of being accountable that I was going out and doing the walks. I wanted to make it a routine. And so I was sharing, here's the week's walks without really much text, right? And this presentation is Words Matter. So we are going to focus on the words. It's not just about like, wow, that's a really cool picture of ukulele, right? Which it is, I think, taken by one of our youth. But it's also about the words, right? And so if you're going to post this picture, what would be the words underneath that you might share when you're trying to use them in a way to prevent suicide? And here they're talking about their own, personal mental health that is impacted by it. So they're just sharing what it's doing for them, as opposed to trying to reach what somebody else might be doing. And I'm not sure if it's how tiny folks' screens are, but it says playing any kind of instrument can help your mental health. It is a major escape from reality. It is just you and the beautiful sounds that come from your instrument. It can also help clear your mind, and it can bring a smile to your face and relax. When you play, you are only focusing on the instrument and the chords, nothing around you. You are not worrying about anything. Having something that distracts you helps you get through those negative thoughts that come in your mind. It helps you breathe, and it allows you to be alone and express yourself.
We had Leslie in the chat say about the image, we are out of tune without you.
Yeah, nice slogan. Thank you, Leslie. All right. This is my image. And it says, being at the beach allows me to become fully present and tap into all my senses. I can see the beauty all around me, sometimes counting waves or clouds. I can smell the ocean. I can taste salt. I can feel the trade winds and the sand between my toes. I can hear the waves crashing on the shore. I am embraced by the ocean. So it's definitely, I mean, that's part of why I like to do a walk on the beach, right? I do it for exercise, but I can also be doing it for my mental health. And so this is my expression of what it's doing for me from a mental health standpoint. So how does that change if we're going to be connecting with someone who is struggling, right? Because that is more about my own personal use of something and sharing how I'm doing. And somebody else might go, oh yeah, that might work for me too. I'm going to try it. But they're still in probably a good place to be thinking about, oh, what are some different additional strengths that I can add right now to my repertoire? Oh, I haven't tried that. I might be interested in trying playing an instrument because that sounded really good to me. And I want that feeling, right? So, whereas when someone's struggling, that's not necessarily where they're at, right? Like, and in all likelihood, they're not there. And so one of the things we did in Sources of Strength is try to create that belonging and connection. And this is one of the activities we do. It's the You Belong pledge, where we really are reaching out to others and just letting them know, I am here to help others when one feels alone or like they don't belong. I'm here to show them that they are loved and they have someone to talk to. I will be that shoulder to cry on. So these are our youth sharing that message, right? So using those words. And this is going to be another campaign where we're actually going to be inviting people to join on into the stories where you can click on and add your own message about how somebody might belong. But I also thought it would be fun to take the same image and say, I can change my narrative with what I write, with my words, right? So now it's no longer about what this beach walk does to me, but I'm using that same picture to talk about it. Folks always say it's better after a storm, but it isn't, at least not right away. The storm can leave the ocean full of debris. It takes time for an ocean to heal. And another squall seems to be on the horizon. I want you to know that I'm here for you and I will help you weather the tough times. It will get better and I'm here for you, here by you, for you, and with you. Okay, so same image, right? Very different meaning, very different tone. So I'm going to pause there briefly, but I want to give people some time to create themselves. And then Danielle, if we can put folks in very small groups to kind of share what they create. But are there any questions that have come up or?
No questions right yet, but I
Okay.
can, let's see, assign some folks.
So the task at hand is to find an image on your phone or on the internet, whatever your choice is, and think about how you would write a message out there if you were using it in your own social media. I think that's probably the most common way. You're going to be sharing that in a small group, although, you know, you can either hold up your phone and share it, or you can just describe what it is. The idea is just to get that practice of thinking. And again, I just reread because I read it out loud differently than when I write on paper. I probably would change my words a little bit on my last one. So don't worry about it. It's okay. But just to get a little bit of practice and to think about how we can take an image that we might be sharing on social media and turn that into a message about hope or help or healing.
Welcome back. All right, Deb, you're muted, so you can go ahead.
Just realized I was about to speak. So welcome back, everybody. how easy was that for folks to think about a photo and to start kind of thinking about the words that you might share for a different purpose, right? Really than what you normally do. You even have, yeah, a couple thumbs up. In our group, the first person that shared their cover picture on their phone, right? That's an easy go-to. I bet that's a source of strength for you, whatever that is, right? So sometimes it's easier to kind of start with this process and thinking about what helps you before you start thinking about how can I help someone else. So thinking, just what is that first image or first two? I have two images that come up, right? What is that and what does it mean for me? And how can I share that with people about how important family is to me, or how important, right, being in nature is to me? Like, these are things that I really connect to. And so that's an easier place to start. Now thinking about, okay, well, how can I share with those same types of things that are important to me, obviously, because I've taken pictures of them, and start sharing things about how I might be there for somebody else, right? So then you start moving, and then grieving, right, and healing is another level too. So as we walk through that process, just being a little bit more cognizant about what we're putting down and why we're putting it down, and what those words are. I am not known for my lengthy kind of posts. I tend to be I tend to be an ABC type of person, like, oh, A, B, C, lock off, very short, very brief, get to the point. And I'm always like, when you have those eloquent writers, I'm like in awe. But I think these are all things that we can work on as we think about them. And in truth, we're trying to convey our availability and connection and emotion, and however we can do that. And so, yes, pictures can do that, but they're not always interpreted the same. Yes, right. So as we think through it, just being mindful of those things. So I think we have just a couple minutes, but we can be open for any questions or comments the group has.
You can unmute and ask your question too. No need to be shy.
Aloha. Thank you so much. So I guess like being vulnerable in our messaging is good.
Yeah, I think that is part of what we're trying to do. And it's okay that we're not always doing okay, right? And if we're not sharing that in our messages, if social media, for example, is always only the positive things, we're giving people the wrong impressions, right? In terms of I feel fortunate that I have as many good days as I have, but every day is not good. And so I think we need to be real about that, and to share that, but to share it in a healthy way, that, yeah, this is tough, and this is what works for me. And not every time I might need something else to work. It's not always the same thing all the time. So yeah.
Right. Not even every day. Is like every hour, every second, we can even change it, right? Like, it's like, oh, I'm fine. And then all of a sudden things happen. And then I'm like, oh, the opposite way. So
yeah,
that's always bring awareness on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody
I
else?
enjoyed it, Deb. Thank you so much.
There we go.
No, you're welcome. Well, I really appreciate everyone being here, and I do encourage you to just keep trying things. It's, that's how we learn. So let's keep doing that. I will get to Danielle a PDF of the slides that were shared today, as well as the safe messaging guidelines to send out to everyone. So please, feel free to utilize those and to share those widely. And I believe she's also going to share the actual video.
Yes, once we get that, I can send you the link to it, but we'll also be posting it on our YouTube page. And our YouTube page, if you just go to YouTube, is just MHA of Hawaii, all written out together. You'll be able to see a list of all the different trainings we do, plus this one, plus our suicide prevention PSA that we put together about 4 months into the pandemic about asking for help. You'll be able to see that as well, which it's really adhered to safe messaging guidelines. And it was a community effort by, many physicians, psychiatrists, psychologists, people in government, and some faith-based leaders that are also members of our Iolaho Prevent Suicide Maui County Task Force. If you are interested in that, I'll just put the link into the chat so you can view it. Deb, anything you want to say to close it out?
No, just everybody try to do something for yourselves every day. I was going to say this weekend and I caught myself. No, every day do it for yourself. Every single day. So that's my message for today. Thank
I like
you
it.
so much.
Today and every day. That's perfect. Well, thank you all for coming to our March Brown Bag. We're so happy to have seen you here. Please look for us monthly. If you're not part of our our newsletter that we send out, you can always respond to the email I send you later. And I'll be glad to put you on our listserv. We list all of our trainings at our website, mentalhealthamericaofhawaii.org. You can just Google us and find it there. We have a list of all trainings on our Get Connected page. So once again, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for showing up. Thank especially for you, Dr. Goebert. We're so happy that you spent some time with us today, and we appreciate you. So everybody have a great day. Do something nice for yourself, not just today, but as Dr. Goebert says, every day. Aloha.